Welcome to Fatima, The Path to Peace. I'm Bill Jasper, Senior Editor of the New American Magazine, here at the Scotia Centre in Niagara Falls. And we're on the concluding day of the conference, and I'm very pleased to be able to stand in as host here to interview Father Methodius Kushko. And he came all the way here from Saskatchewan, from Yorkton. And in Yorkton, you have a program on television, do you not,
And also
Father?
on radio.
And on radio.
Well,
first of all, it's a pleasure to have you here,
Thank
Father.
you.
And
Well, you see, in Canada, the CRTC, which is the governing body for the television radio, they would not give a license to rock the Christian radio station unless they had 2 hours per week for Aboriginal people and 2 hours for the Ukrainian people, called the Ukrainian hour. So that's how I got into radio, because they needed me.
they needed you to fill a quota there.
That's right, that's true.
Okay, so you are Ukrainian,
Yes.
but you weren't born in the Ukraine.
No,
correct?
I'm Ukrainian Polish. My mom was Polish, and my father was Ukrainian, and they tell me I have a Polish face. You see? That's right.
And but you speak Ukrainian?
Yes.
And you speak Polish?
In a limited way, although people often try to make me feel good and say that my Polish is good, but it's not that good, you know.
Very good.
Yes, and I also studied French, and I was able to get by in French too, you know.
Well, very good. Now, you're here for the Fatima conference,
Right.
and it's been a very wonderful, filled conference for the whole week. Why is Fatima important to you?
Well, I became a Fatima person way back in over 40 years ago, back in the 50s, when the movie came out, you know, Warner Brothers, you
Yes.
know, and
Miracle of Fatima.
that's right.
Yes.
I knew that we will never have peace in the world unless Russia is consecrated to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I just bought it immediately, and it's proved to be true.
And so you've been waiting a long time
That's right.
and praying to have this happen and
That's
working
right,
for
yeah,
them.
right.
And on your Ukrainian hour that you do on television and on the radio, what are the subjects that you
Well,
get into?
first of all, I do a lot of interviewing of dignitaries and other people, you know, of interest on my TV program. But on my radio program, it's usually the Sunday sermon. And also, you know, I deal with religious topics, and every Sunday there's a sermon, and there's the reading of the parts of the Ukrainian liturgy of the St. John Chrysostom. And I'm surprised, you know, at the number of people who are not Catholic that listen to my program.
Oh,
Yeah, like one day I met 4 boys sitting down, and they said, "Father, we listen to your TV and radio programs because you are a born-again Christian." I says, "Well, I never told anybody on TV that I was a born-again Christian." He says, "You don't have to, just the way you talk." You see, it makes me laugh, though, you know, that, you know, we never get away with anything, you know.
Yeah.
You see.
Well, Father, I mentioned in my talk today that, and many Americans who are not Ukrainian are not aware of the fact that this year, going from last year 2012 to 2013, the 80th anniversary of the Holodomor.
That's right.
Did I pronounce that correctly?
Very well.
That is the 80th anniversary of this terrible genocide in Ukraine, the forced famine, which ended up killing, depending on the estimate, somewhere between 5 to 7 million Ukrainians by the communists under Stalin at that time. What are you doing in your community? I know in Ukraine there are commemorations and that have been going since last year, different things marking it. Why is that important for people to know about this and to remember?
Well, first of all, the Holodomor, you know, has sort of destroyed the spirit and the genuine, you know, emotional makeup of Ukrainian people forever. Ukrainian people will never be the same. That's what they'll tell you. Secondly is what we're trying to do is to remind ourselves and to pray for all the people that died that didn't have any sacraments. See, most of the people that died were Orthodox, and the Orthodox people have the same sacraments that we Catholic people have. Well, so they didn't receive the anointing, as they call it. They didn't receive the Holy Communion because the Orthodox people today, because I also anoint some, you know, when their priests aren't around, we have to pray for them because they died without the sacraments. And thirdly, that such a Holodomor would never occur in the world again anywhere. It's an awareness that has to grow deep-seatedly into the psyche and spirit and heart of people.
And an awareness of that should lead one to be vigilant against those kinds of conditions which would allow that to take place, which is unrestricted, untrammeled power concentrated in the hands of the state, because that's how Stalin was able to do that, because the Ukrainian people had no way to defend themselves against him then, correct? And so in the famine, I've done a lot of reading on it over the years and have written a lot of stories on it. People don't realize that when the communists came in and took every grain of wheat and corn and all of the animals, and they left nothing for the people to eat, and they died a very terrible, agonizing death, many of them.
Yes, except that Joseph Stalin himself said that he killed 10 million Ukrainians, you see. And I remember, because I'm a student of history, my arts degree is in history, and there was a Professor Bloom, I think he's from Minnesota or something, wrote the book on world history, and he said that it could have been up to 25 million people.
Yes, when I said 5 to 7 million, that's the kind of the most conservative estimates, because yes, there are, and that's the problem when you have these mega murders like that. I mentioned in my talk Father Kozina from Slovenia. Just now, for the last 3 years, they've been discovering these mass graves that nobody even knew were there of Slovenians. That's thousands, tens of thousands, bigger than the Katyn Wood massacre that Tito's communists slaughtered and buried in mass graves in Slovenia. And they've been hidden all of this time. And so when you get to those kinds of numbers, it's very easy for the perpetrators of that to hide the total magnitude of it.
But Stalin said, openly, he said, I wanted to kill all the Ukrainians, but there was too many of them. He couldn't kill all 45 million.
No.
And then he couldn't do that either because there was a lot of Russians that are infiltrated into Ukraine. He would have had to somehow do something with them.
So, Father, we were talking earlier, and you went to the Ukraine back in the 70s while the communists were still in control there. And what struck you at that time about going into a communist country at that time?
Well, what struck me is that they were fed up with communism, and they told us so. And we weren't catching on. I was catching on, but others weren't. Like, for example, the leader of the group, who studied in England, she was proficient in English, She says, Father, even if we were communists, if we could only be separated from Russia, we'd be doing well, you see.
Well, and that's a big issue there, the Russian dominance, and even today with the pipelines and things, that's still a big issue in Ukraine, is it not? Belarus is still very much a communist country and very closely tied to Moscow and the Kremlin. What is the dynamic in Ukraine? There are still obviously a large number of communists or pro-communists there, but most of the people are solidly opposed to that, correct?
Well, what bothers me is that their president, you know, is a Moscovite. He's a Moscow supporter. He's an agent, you know, of Putin, you know. But I have a relative in Lviv. She's retired, and she has very difficult time in making ends meet. Then on my stepfather's side, there's another, you know, relative, So I send $800 twice a year in order to support them. Well, my God, you know, would they send me cards of Thanksgiving, you could almost see the tears on them yet, you know, because it means so much to them, you know. And they have divine liturgies, as we call it, masses said, for my intention and so forth, you know. That's sad, because the elderly are not being looked after, and the people are having a very difficult time, you know, to making ends meet, though, you see. That's what they tell me.
In Ukraine, most people here in the United States are not aware. It's a very large country, both in territory and in population. What's the population currently of Ukraine?
Well, it's supposed to be 45 million, but it's not, because people are leaving the country and immigrating, see, to Italy, to Canada, to United States, and Germany, wherever, you know. They're leaving them, you know, their country, you know.
Well, before the communists took over there, Ukraine had always been referred to during earlier times as the breadbasket of Europe. The huge areas there where they grew lots of wheat and all. What is the agriculture doing there now? Are they able to make a go of it agriculturally, or is it still, are they still reeling from the communist era?
Well, the thing is, you know, that they have the Chernozem, the black soil, and it's the richest soil in the world. If they would only have our farm technology, they would outproduce the whole world in wheat and all grains, you see. But they haven't got the technology, you see. It's the same thing in medicine. They are very good doctors and with knowledge, but they haven't got the tools, you see. You see, that's their drawback, you know.
So, from what you've seen in Ukraine, have they been able to roll back some of the socialist state impediments to those kinds of improvements?
Well, they're doing it slowly. You know, I met a Mennonite chap who was the head of their farms. They still have collective farms, but it's free, you know. And he's got about 1,000 people under his command. And he was telling me that they're doing much better now than they did ever before. Their reforms are slowly growing, you see.
Well, I thought that they had decollectivized.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Oh,
yeah.
they okay.
Yeah,
so they,
yeah.
So they are getting more into a private mode there. Or some of them are still cooperative or something.
Yes, well, they call them cooperative farms. Well, who was it? One of the profs, you know, of in America, said that when you, even under communists, when you gave, say, 2.5 hectares to people to produce, to look after, and they would produce and make more money than a person working in the collective farm per year.
Yeah,
you see,
it's the personal incentive because they can keep the produce of their labors.
Right.
What is the situation with the church now. During the communist era, as in all of the communist states, there was persecution of various levels. What is the situation now with regard to the church? Is it total freedom?
Oh, yes. Well, I was surprised and I was angered because I didn't know that Father Setlin, was it? You know, the one that came here and spoke, and he was in Lviv,
yes.
Western Ukraine, he was in Kyiv, he was in Moscow, and he's saying how the young people there are turning to Mary, turning to the faith through the Fatima message, you see. Yet I've never heard about that, and yet I have relatives there, you know. And that's unfortunate, though, you know. I mean, because we in Canada and the United States should know that, you know, that the young people are all going to church, you know. They are.
Now, are there any programs like yours, like you have in Canada, in Ukraine? Are priests able to get on the radio and television like you do here?
Well, they tell me that they do. You know, I haven't come across it, and I'm not informed. But they tell me there are priests who are doing radio and TV work. You know, like my work is ministry. You see, that's what I call it. You know.
So, but as far as you know, the churches are open now. When I went to Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and some of the other countries, many of the churches were starting to be reopened and renovated, but many of them were still had been turned into barracks or other uses, mechanic sheds or something like that for the communist state. What about in Ukraine? Are the churches being restored again?
Yes, they are. Both
property-wise and in terms of being rebuilt?
Well, especially in the Ukrainian part of Poland, you know, the Polish government church is not turning back to us our cathedrals, you know, in some places, you know. And I know the Holy Father had to turn around and he had to interfere, you know, Pope John Paul, you know, and he said, look, this cathedral, say, in this city, and you know, it was Ukrainian, Polish hierarchy have to turn it back. Yeah, it's been happening, you know. Yes.
Very good.
But I remember when we were there, you know, whenever we came to a place that used to be a church, you know, and they turned it to something else, we'd all cross ourselves, you see.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we felt the presence, see?
Yeah. You were just mentioning that when you were in Ukraine, this is some time ago.
1974.
Yes. Now, back at that time, the churches were all still under the government control, the communist control. The churches now, has the government held on to any of the properties, or have they all turned them back over to the churches?
Well, I was in Ukraine altogether 3 times. My last time I was there, I headed a group, and that was just after the, you know, the freedom, you know, 91 or something of that nature. And it was, the government was turning the churches over, I mean, to the hierarchy, you know, to the bishops and to the priests and so forth. Slowly, but surely they were doing that, you know, especially in Western Ukraine, you know.
One of the things that struck me, I guess it was 4 years ago when I was in the Baltic states, and there were still quite a few large statues from the Soviet era of the, you know, the workers with the hammer and sickle, and those great big bronze ones around, and the Soviet star. And it was a very big bone of contention, because a lot of people said, hey, we want that down, we want it out of here. It's been decades now, and we want that out of here. And yet there were still enough communist elements there that were keeping those things in there. And after World War II, the denazification program, all the swastikas were taken down and all of those symbols of the Third Reich, and nobody would have thought of defending those symbols because of the oppression and murder, etc. And yet the people that I stayed with, they were all very upset that all these statues of communist leaders were still being kept up there in Lithuania and Latvia, Estonia. And are they having any of that same problem in Ukraine, or have they been able to divest themselves of those things?
Well, I noticed one thing when I was there the last time, that I didn't see any more statues, but every village that you had a great big monument of Taras Shevchenko. And every place you go, you'll find a rejuvenation of Taras Shevchenko, the great freedom fighter. Right. Yes, you see, that's what was prevalent. There may have been see, I can't speak for Eastern Ukraine, like Dnepropetrovsk, and all of those other places, because I wasn't there. There could have been, because see, it's dominated more by the Russian population. Right. You see.
And that's I know when I was, for instance, in Tallinn, Estonia, there was a big battle going on at that time because they had a Soviet soldier this statue that had been dominating a big square in Tallinn, and most of the Estonian people wanted it out of there, and the Russian population that had been brought in there were still pretty much under at least the sway of the communists. They said, no, we want that. So eventually they had to move it, but they moved it into a Russian section of their town and put it up there. So it shows the enduring problem that you have in those areas.
Yes. Well, we're not fooled. Communism is not totally dead in Ukraine.
Right. No. And what I've found in most of the places where I have done the research on it and talked with people who are from those countries and that have done research themselves, is that many of the influential people still in government and in business and what have been party members, Communist Party members, and not just party members, but top people. And so they made sure before the change of government that they were put in secure places, either political or business oriented, so that they had a lot of the state assets, and they now dominate much of the media and business. And when I was in Vilnius, Lithuania, for instance, a friend of mine pointed out that this big mall, big beautiful mall that had been built there with all the fancy shops and the Madison Avenue thing. He says, well, yeah, that's one of the top communists. Now he's this big supposed entrepreneur, but he got millions of dollars from the government to set up this mall, and that's how it works.
And the poor people are still poor.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's a heartbreak, though. I saw that, as I was driving with my cousins, and they showed me all the dachas, of the former communist people who are now holding the most important places in their society.
Yeah. So that is seems to be an ongoing issue in most of the countries that were formerly communist. They still have not had a denazification program like we had in Germany after the after the war. There is a movement in throughout Europe to have or an attempt over the last couple of decades to actually open up the records of the KGB and the other secret police of the various countries, so that they could find out, okay, who actually was doing all the bad things, just like we had the war crimes after trials after World War II. but it seems every time they get around to actually revealing those things, the pressure is put on them to keep it quiet, and most of the time that doesn't get revealed.
Well, I had 5 converts, redemptorists, you see, that are now called blessed, eh? And one of them, for example, the communists took him and pinned him to the wall like Christ, and he had to die that way, you know. And then they went and they cut his stomach open, and they put a dead child in there for people to watch, you know. And the other one, in 1950, they came and he was a superior, you know, one of our brightest fathers, and they just clubbed him to death, you know. But the other 2, well, they had him in prisons, you see, you know, like Blessed Vasil Wilichakowski, who's now in the shrine at St. Joseph's Church in Winnipeg, and people from the States and everywhere come to see him. And the other one, of course, is a bishop, Nicholas Czarnecki. He's in the shrine, you know, in view, and there's all kinds of miracles happening, you see. And the 5th one was Blessed Methodius Trichka. He was a Czech that came to Ukraine, and of course, after 20 years, you know, he was there. He was a missionary. And when the communists came, they put him into prison, and he started singing Ukrainian carols. And they told him to shut up, you know, and he wouldn't. So they took the heat away, you know, and he got pneumonia and died. But now we gave him back to the Czechs, you see. He's not in our bag, but he was the 5th one, you know, that we had.
Well, you've been carrying on the faithful fight, Father, and so we appreciate that. And thank you for joining us here. Appreciate it. God bless you.
Thank you ever so much.